Okay, we are here in Vienna. We're in the Rathaus, the city hall. We're in the big Festsaal. For those of you who have followed just now Open Piano for Refugees, just before this session, you will see that that's a perfect bridge to this new session, which I'm going to introduce to you in a minute. The power of communities, the values of connecting actors to collaborate and support each other. It all sounds very obvious, but from experience I can tell you it is not so obvious. I'm very happy, therefore, to get to the stage Tina Simonovic-Einwalter, who is the Ombudswoman of Croatia. And Tina will moderate the session, which is entitled The Power of Community, Together for Equality and Human Rights. Tina, you have the floor.
Does it work? Very good. Thank you, Friso. Indeed, this was a great introduction to our session. We just heard about the power of community. And being a student or a sponsor of Doremi, interacting through music. At the same time, of course, communities is something that institutions, independent institutions, national human rights institutions, and equality bodies need to focus on as well, together with their partners, civil society organizations, human rights defenders of all types. So, hello and welcome to the session, The Power of Community, Together for Equality and Human Rights. First, I want to thank Equinet and ENRI, Equinet European Organization, European Network of Equality Bodies, and ENRI, the European Network of National Human Rights Institutions, for organizing this session, as well as to the Fundamental Rights Agency for creating this wonderful space for all of us to connect and discuss. A space for all who indeed work on making a difference, achieving justice for all through equality and human rights. Now, I'm hoping that if you join this session online, it means that you believe in the power of community. It also means that you are ready to step up your efforts and connect more in order to achieve more. And that is what I'm looking forward to hearing from today, from other speakers on this panel, as well as from the audience. So, how to build communities? That is the central question of this session. How to make sure that we really did the best that we could, that we really are doing the best that we can as human rights defenders. So now I'm asking a question to the audience, wherever you may be, behind your screens across Europe. What is community to you? What word first comes to mind? Choose a word or two words and then use the Slido app to answer the question. We will see the results in the word cloud later, so follow the link you see on screen, insert the code #FRF2021 and have your say. And we'll hear what various meanings of the word community are to the members of our audience. Now I have to say, indeed, and share that it is a bit strange to be discussing by myself on a stage, but I know I will be joined by some of our speakers who are online, and I know there's those of you watching across Europe. So, yes, institutions. Which institutions come to your mind when you're thinking about human rights and equality? To my mind, certainly, it's equality bodies and national human rights institutions. Independent institutions which exist across Europe and that work on making a difference and making a change, on protecting the rule of law, on protecting fundamental rights, on protecting equality. we come together at the European level as Equinet and ENRI, and we work daily at the national level to amplify the voices of those whose voices are often not heard loudly enough in the national context. And at the same time, we work on amplifying those voices at a European level as well through our European networks. So our goal really at all these levels is to build communities that can work better, harder, and make more impact. Because as institutions, if we do not understand the power of community, if we're not thinking about what community means, various meanings of the word community, we are not really doing all that we should be doing. If we're not reaching those that sometimes cannot be easily reached. So today we will also focus on collaboration. We will focus on connecting. And I'm not giving you little hints on what to write in the word cloud, but maybe I am as well. So, how to build strong communities to make a difference. And first, I'm really happy to introduce and give space to a civil society organization working at European level. To introduce Ms. Berber Biala-Hettinga, an EU advocate for human rights, representing Amnesty International Europe. And Berber is going to tell us more about the power of community from a civil society perspective, focusing on CSOs and civic space, something that the Fundamental Rights Agency has focused a lot on over the years, and on the term that we should all be focusing on, human rights defenders, and how to enable more space and give more support to human rights defenders at the national level and at the European level. Berber, go ahead.
And thank you very much for this opportunity to join you today in this panel on the power of community. There are many organizations and people out there with great stories to tell, so it's really a privilege to be able to share some with you now from the perspective of Amnesty International. On a daily basis, my colleagues and I work with a large number of partners and stakeholders across the world. Amnesty's run campaigns and advocacy efforts jointly with other civil society organizations, with activists, with youth, equality bodies, human rights institutions, artists, journalists, politicians, and many others to stand up for human rights and to create real positive change. Too many human rights challenges remain across the world and also here in Europe. And it can be hard at times to believe that we can make a change. Often we fight and we don't get the result that we want, but very often we do. And even if we don't get to the maximum of what we asked for, we ensure a change for the better. Today, I'd like to focus on two examples. One in which we really achieved the change, and one in which we haven't yet, I hope. Because also, when we face difficulty and when we keep running into walls, the power of community is amazing, and it should never be underestimated. My first example takes place in Denmark. In the past years, my colleagues in Amnesty Denmark, jointly with colleagues of Amnesty's International Secretariat, we worked hard to make a real change around sexual violence in Denmark, joining a fight that had already been ongoing for a long time. In 2019, Amnesty International issued a report detailing the barriers that are faced by women in Denmark in accessing justice for rape. This report was followed by really strong efforts of a wide range of people working together within Amnesty. Most importantly, Amnesty worked very closely with several survivors of rape who bravely shared their stories in so many different ways. The media, national and international attention, followed by the campaign of Let's Talk About Yes, and concerted advocacy efforts, brought real attention to this issue and put it squarely on the agenda of the government. My colleagues and the survivors worked with journalists who highlighted their stories, and with parliamentarians who helped push the matter on the political agenda, both in public and behind the scenes. And they worked with the Danish Institute for Human Rights to bring the matter before the UN treaty bodies, and much, much more. So this pressure brought the Minister of Justice at the time to set up an expert panel, bringing together government authorities, law enforcement, social workers, civil society, and others to advise the minister directly on this matter. This led not only to a clear proposal for a change in the penal code around the definition of rape, but to specific recommendations around access to justice, support to survivors, changing attitudes, and eliminating stereotypes. 2 years after the report was launched in December 2020, the Danish parliament finally passed legislation to recognize that sex without consent is indeed rape. This new law to introduce consent-based legislation in Denmark is a huge achievement of rape survivors, of activists, of women and human rights organizations, and it sends a powerful message about what kind of society we want to live in. Accompanied by concerted efforts to challenge widespread harmful rape myths and gender stereotypes, it can be a fundamental starting point for changing behaviors and attitudes. So when all of that comes together with this power of community, future generations now never need to question whether sex without consent is really rape and never doubt that perpetrators will be punished. Let me move to my second example, which is around Poland. So I doubt there's anyone listening today who doesn't know about the serious challenges the people in Poland face with their government's concerted attack on independence of judiciary and also on rights of women, LGBTI people, people on the move, and much more. Today, I'd like to focus on the independence of judiciary. Not because it's a fight that we are currently winning, because unfortunately, we are mostly losing and we keep hitting new lows. Just last week's judgment of the unlawfully composed Constitutional Tribunal that set aside the primacy of EU law represents a particular low point. I want to highlight this because the community in this case has been truly extraordinary. Because since late 2015, when the newly elected government at the time started their so-called reform of the judiciary, we've seen the people, civil society organizations, the Polish ombudsman, academics, politicians at national, European and international level, journalists and many more rise up for the independence of judiciary. Unprecedented attack brought about an unprecedented response. We've seen major protests of the people in Poland, supported by people from abroad, taking the streets in defense of the judiciary. We've seen an amazing effort by Ombudsman Adam Bodnar standing up against the government despite facing major threats, and finally also being removed under, well, let's say the most unusual circumstances. And his work is a clear example of how human rights institutions can also be real human rights defenders and be attacked for that in the same way. And I know Tena can also speak to that. What is most remarkable, however, is really to see how judges and prosecutors in Poland have stood up against the repression, facing suspension, demotions, being moved across the country to a different post, public smear campaigns, and even criminal prosecution. They stood up and they continue to stand bravely, and they take action in Poland and abroad to fight for their own independence. And they're not alone. They're supported by judges, prosecutors, and lawyers, and related associations from around the world. And of course, by civil society, academia, and many others. Of course, it's very sad that they were pushed into this fight, but their reaction has been magnificent. And there isn't enough time to tell the full story of the many impressive actions taken. I'd just like to highlight one powerful example. When in January 2020, judges from 20 European countries joined their Polish counterparts on a silent march of protest through Warsaw. It was an unprecedented public display of international judicial solidarity. Wearing their robes, the judges, along with thousands of demonstrators across the country, were marching against these repressive new measures. As Amnesty International, we issued numerous reports highlighting the human rights concerns. And jointly with partners and also with the judges and prosecutors, we've advocated towards the European institutions, the Council of Europe, UN, and governments across the globe. And this year, Amnesty Poland launched a campaign highlighting some of the individual stories of judges under attack. As I said, we're very far from winning this battle for judicial independence. And despite strong legal action by the Commission and great judgments from the European Court of Justice and even the European Court of Human Rights, but it's a serious crisis and we will not give up the fight. In Brussels, I also continue this fight with my colleagues in other organizations in support of the people in Poland. And we can only hope that the Commission and Council will also continue to fight even harder and be more decisive to ensure the Polish authorities truly change their course. Now let me move to another point. Because central to most positive human rights change are activists, human rights defenders, civil society organizations who work tirelessly to achieve this. And they can't achieve change without others listening to their calls. And they can't thrive if not supported in their efforts. Unfortunately, civic space has been under extreme pressure in many places across Europe, with clear and targeted attacks aimed at voices that are critical, such as in government, such as we've seen in Hungary and Poland. Also through measures that are set to counter terrorism, such as in France, and through the use and abuse of the pandemic to suppress public protest, and through the criminalization of solidarity with people on the move, and much more. the Fundamental Rights Agency, has done great work in the past years documenting threats and putting forward powerful recommendations. It's great to have the agency stand with us in this fight. And while a lot of responsibility around civic space rests on member states, the EU also can and should play an active role in this. It's great to have attention for civic space in the Commission's Rule of Law report, but it should be expanded. And it's helpful to have Vice President Jourová designated as contact point for civil society, but a clear mandate should follow from this role. And it's important to have funding through the Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values program, but we also need to cut red tape and ensure easier access to funding for small and grassroots civil society organizations. And we need the EU to stand with civil society, in particular human rights defenders, when they're under attack. So we call on the Commission to work with civil society and human rights institutions, with the FRA, the Parliament, the Council and many others, to create an EU strategy on civic space that's based on the following 5 principles. To recognize the role of and to speak up for civil society, to secure an enabling space for civil society, to monitor, document and analyze challenges, and to protect civil society from attacks, and finally to take legal action to uphold the role of CSOs and protect civic freedoms. The work we do is only as strong as the many different elements we're dealing with, and it is clear there's real power in community. We always have to do our utmost to bring in the people we're fighting for, as their voice needs to be heard. And we have to keep finding ways to connect with each other in order to strengthen our fight. It's a great pleasure to have this chance to discuss with you today, and I thank each and every one of you for what you do for your fight for change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Berber. Thank you also for choosing such great examples. Now, the really big topics of our world, of Europe, of our countries, choosing the topic of gender-based violence, of rape, and really sharing with us a story of how to get results. We heard a story which is about civil society, an independent institution, the Danish Institute for Human Rights, government authorities all coming together and cooperating, various actors focusing on their roles in order to produce change. That's the way it should be. The second example you decided to share with us is one of the hottest topics in Europe today, speaking about the independence of judiciary in Poland, and again highlighting the role of various actors of the Ombudsman institution. The focus on independent institutions is of course crucial for us, as Henry and Equinet, the Polish Ombudsman, being both an equality body and an NHRI and a member both of our networks. But you also spoke about judges from 20 European countries coming together in a show of support and solidarity, and that's such a strong European message of the community judges make across Europe as well, but also speaking about the role of European institutions in protecting the rule of law and protecting fundamental rights. Thank you so much for those great examples. And now we're ready to see what our members of the audience think when they hear the word community. When you look at these words, cooperation comes up high, and I'm so glad it does, because what we are speaking about today really is cooperation, but it's more than that. It's collaboration, it's teamwork, it's unity, it's togetherness, it's solidarity. Thank you for participating in this, and thank you for sharing your views, because that really is the topic of our conversation today. Now, I have to say that we will hear immediately a reply coming from the European Commission on what you said about European institutions, and more specifically the European Commission on what you stated, with Monika Ladmanová joining us later. However, what I'm sad about is today with me on stage, we were supposed to have somebody who would speak about the main focus of this panel, which was supposed to be an example of an independent institution working together with somebody who's a human rights defender, working together to approach communities or a particular community. Unfortunately, he could not be with us. His name is Milan Mitrovic, and he was supposed to be here on stage with me, and I'll tell you why. The Croatian Ombudswoman, as an equality body, as an NHRI, was chosen by our two respective networks, ENRI and Equinet, to share with you an example of how change can be produced in making links, in cooperating, in using many of those words which you, as our audience members, wrote in Slido. Now, what was the issue at stake? We, in 2008, in Croatia, adopted our new Anti-Discrimination Act, and our institution became a central national equality body. And we started as an equality body, and of course, we received complaints. We received complaints from citizens. And based on those complaints, we made our assessments. And then came the time to write our annual report and submit it to the parliament. And then when we were writing about ethnic discrimination, we wrote about discrimination of Roma. But then there was a strange gap. We were writing about discrimination of Roma, but we weren't getting complaints from members of the Roma community. And of course, we were getting our insights from what we knew. But how did we know it? We were looking at international reports. We were looking at what CERD from the UN was telling us. We were looking at what ECRI from the Council of Europe was telling Croatian ethnic discrimination. But as an independent institution, we weren't close enough to the Roma community. And then we did some research. And our research really showed that a considerable number of people in Croatia, 63% of the general population, perceived Roma people as one of the most discriminated groups. So that corresponded well to what we were saying in our annual reports, but we weren't getting complaints. And the issue to be solved by us was how do we raise the number of Roma complaints? What do we do? And we realized that we needed to change ourselves. We needed to do more, we needed to be better. We needed to cooperate and collaborate. I'm thinking of those words on Slido again, and you were spot on. Those were the words we were thinking about. So what did we do? We decided to leave the office. And rather than wait for members of the Roma community to come to us, we decided to go to them. How did we do that? Well, it's been a long process. It's been happening for the past 13 years. And it took some strategy, and it took the willingness of our staff to leave the office, and it took us a long time to identify the right intermediaries. We started by working with the Roma representative in the Croatian parliament, with the Governmental Office for Human Rights and Rights of National Minorities, but also reaching out to the Roma community itself. So we did some desk research, we talked to locals, we walked the streets of Roma settlements, of remote Roma settlements all across Croatia, visited homes when invited, which was really crucial for our staff members to see what the living conditions of people are, to talk to them face to face, and to get them to tell us what the issues are. And then to put them in legal terms, and to start cases, and to start working on these cases. And that also led us to getting more and more cases. That led us to do strategic litigation on Roma cases in front of the courts. And really that initiative helped us build trust, step by step, because trust is never built from one day to another. It's a long process which requires strategy and the willingness to leave your office and to see people, and to talk to people, and to look at Roma settlements, and to walk the roads that those people walk, and to talk to them directly, in person, face to face. That's what we did. What I'm really not happy about at all is that you cannot see Milan here, and that we cannot hear him. We wanted to have him here. We also wanted him to connect online, and everything worked until a couple of minutes ago, unfortunately, and that's the way things are. His internet connection isn't stable enough. But that's the way it is, and we need to make it work. Every time there's a glitch, there's a difficulty in the work of independent institutions. It's up to the institutions to figure out how to resolve a certain problem. So now it's me speaking about what we do and how we collaborate without Milan here, which would have been better. But that's the way it is. And I'm sure there will be opportunities in the future as well, where we will be able to get Milan to come to Vienna to the Fundamental Rights Forum to share with you, or some other member of the Roma community in Croatia. But yes, when we spoke to him many times, the things that he wanted to share were that trust is the most difficult thing to build. Because when there is distrust in institutions, and with some communities there is mistrust in institutions, building that trust is something that we all need to work on from all sides. And then independent institutions can really be a bridge towards decision makers. Independent institutions can be the ones who help those voices be amplified and to work together in producing change, in getting the message across. In Croatia, what we currently do have is quite strong pieces of legislation when it comes to the rights of national minorities, including the Roma minority. We have political representation in the parliament, and we have governmental institutions working on the right of Roma. Even right now, as we speak, there is a big meeting where representatives of our office were invited by governmental representatives and Roma representatives to discuss together how to improve the situation in the northern part of the country where there are some challenges, important challenges raised for the Roma community. So that's an example of how independent institutions can work together with other actors, with other human rights defenders, with civil society, with people like Milan, who maybe don't recognize themselves as human rights defenders, but they surely are. Now, what I do want to also share with you is that, of course, all that wouldn't necessarily be that easy if we didn't have the support of European institutions. For us, as equality bodies and NHRIs, it is important to have our networks at the European level. It is important to have that sort of support from various European institutions, including FRA, as an agency which has continuously worked on standards for equality bodies and for national human rights institutions, working on amplifying our voice as well at the European level and our attempts to influence the European agenda when it comes to fundamental rights and equality. And we have been quite successful in that European level of collaboration as well. Now, what's also important is to hear what the European Commission is doing. And here we will be hearing from Monika. And Monika is somebody who has been working very, very closely with Vice President Jourová. She is the cabinet expert of Vice President Jourová and has been working with her for years now, both on supporting civil society as well as on working on standards for equality bodies, working on various issues to do with what we are talking about today. Do we have Monika online with us? Monika, hello. You were already asked some really important questions by Berber, and I want to hear your views on what the European Commission is doing and what it can do to support civil society organizations, to support human rights defenders, to support independent institutions in securing the rule of law and human rights, fundamental rights in our own countries, EU member states, but at the European level as well.
Thank you, Tena. So good afternoon to Vienna, to all parts of Europe where we are watched, and also to my colleagues, speakers. We know ourselves with Tena for a few years, so I allow myself to tell her so familiarly. First of all, big thank you for creating this narrative around the human rights defenders and about bringing in this notion of community, cooperation, trust, and network. This is something what I feel we tend to kind of forget or leave aside during the everyday work on defending the human rights. But this is so important to make this stop and to think about how we can make ourselves stronger. And this is exactly what it leads to. And when I can just give you a very brief overview on what the European Commission is doing, and also to react on Barber's great presentation. Thank you, Barber, for the concrete examples. They are very clear and self-telling about what the human rights defenders are kind of facing, and also what could be maybe the angle the other actors take in supporting and empowering themselves. And now I will be talking about the angle from the European Commission, because this is, what I'm the most familiar with, but I also work closely with our European Fundamental Rights Agency. So there are other different actors coming from the European level, also the European Parliament, and to a certain extent, if I may say, also the Council, where the member states are taking their decisions. But as for the European Commission, what I would like to highlight here are maybe three things. One is the new strategy on strengthening the application of the Fundamental Rights Charter. This document has been adopted a year ago, and it is now a clear roadmap for the European Commission, also suggesting to the member states how to ensure that the fundamental rights are protected. The point there is that we need to make the rights a reality for all. And the point is that we are living in a very different realities like 20 years ago when the Charter was adopted. The rights are still valid, but the realities are different. And part of it is also the exceptional momentum of the COVID pandemic, for example. And the exceptional momentum is sometimes taken as a hostage for different approaches from different governments trying to limit the fundamental rights. So there, I think our roadmap is clear in saying that the fundamental rights are still the same, and we have to just adopt new measures, new ways how we protect them. And the big emphasis there is on the empowerment of the human rights defenders and on the civil society role in this process, a part of the role of the member states themselves and a part of the role of the judicial professionals, so to say. And it has been already mentioned that the role of, for example, the ombudspersons or the role of even different actors, which might seem as an unexpected human rights defenders, because their role is maybe different. They are judges or they are attorneys or whomever, but then they march in support of those who are in troubles in the countries, even in Europe, where the judicial reform is taking a different path than we would predict in the democratic society. So these are all the new allies for us, and we also have to take this into the account when creating our ways of support and empowerment. But basis for us is always to empower civil society and the human rights defenders. How we do it, there is, for example, the financial support available. I'm sure that everybody is aware of the newly, I would say, enlarged program on the rights, equality and values. It existed before. It's a granting program providing funds to the civil society. It has a higher budget, and also it has now a little bit of different procedure how the money can be reached out to those who really need them, so to say, the civil society in every member state. But soon enough, I think by the end of the year, I believe, there will be a call for proposals where the intermediaries for redistribution of quite a lot of money for the civil society will be invited to submit their proposals. So that's one important thing, and this is related to the strategy on strengthening the Fundamental Rights Charter application. The second important thing I would like to highlight here is the planned legislation called Anti-Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. And it is the legislation which the Commission has in the pipeline to propose in the 2022, next year. And it is, so to say, to stop or to fight the abusive litigation against journalists, but also against the rights defenders in different member states. This, I think, can be a kind of breakthrough in how the Commission is stepping in with its own regulatory framework to ensure that the human rights defenders are protected. There has been an open public consultation, and I hope that many of you also contributed to this. But if not, you will have another chance, and this is the third third thing I would like to highlight here, how the Commission can support the human rights defenders and build stronger community. And again, you might be aware that there is a plan to review and to adopt the legislation on strengthening the equality bodies and to introduce the binding standards, to kind of raise the standards in some member states where this has not yet been achieving the same level as in another member states. And for this, the public consultation will be opened in November. So I would like to invite you to follow the European Commission website and to actively contribute, because I truly believe that this will be one of the most important moments for the public rights defenders in a way that it can really bring the change. How do we propose the legislation? Of course, then it depends how the co-legislators, including the member states, will shape it further in the legislative process. But I think that we can really set the bar high and to propose a very ambitious draft where the standards will be clear about independency and etc., etc. So these are the three things I really like to mention here today, but I can talk much more about this whole topic because it's so close to my heart. Civil society is in the spot of the European Commission, given that for the first time we have the commissioners group called the New Push for Democracy. It's kind of response to what is happening today in Europe, how the democracy is now threatened by different elements, and civil society is one of the pillars for bringing back the full democracy to Europe, if I may put it this way. Thank you, Tena.
Thank you so much, Monika. And the things you mentioned are so incredibly important. And I'm quite sure everybody who is listening to us today is really appreciative of all these efforts. I think the Commission is really, really focusing on the right topics, the ones that you mentioned. There are some others as well, but the ones that you mentioned certainly are the ones that I really want to focus on as a human rights defender coming from an NHRI and an equality body and an ombudsman institution. Maybe because we have just a little bit more time left with you, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about the New Push for Democracy, because this is something that many stakeholders don't really know about. Is there a little bit more than you can share with us?
Of course. Thank you also for your nice words that the Commission is doing a lot. There is always kind of option to do more. It's a question of balancing also different pressures and situations. But Berber already mentioned also that there is this rule of law report, which we had the second edition recently in July, and this is something new as well as a reaction on the developments in Europe where the rule of law is questioned, and the monitoring and the prevention of situation can be done through a thorough and detailed reporting. And in the rule of law, there is the section on the civil society, which again, Berber already mentioned, it can be also improved a little bit. There is a clear methodology for the rule of law report, but we are also happy to hear from you, from civil society, what do you like to see more represented in the report when it comes to the situation of civil society. But this, I just wanted to react to what Berber also mentioned on what the Commission does or can do. When it comes to the New Push for Democracy, if I may, every new European Commission is deciding on its structure and on its portfolio in a bit different way. So there are some of the agendas which are there forever. You can imagine employment and social affairs, some economic agendas, trade agenda, the external relations, etc. But for the commission, which has been nominated in 2019 and led by Madame von der Leyen, there is a group of vice presidents which are entitled and designated to introduce the new push for European democracy. And this is led by the Vice President Jourová, who is the Vice President for Values and Transparency. And again, there has never been before the portfolio of the college member with such a title. But the point is that with this portfolio, we clearly show, the Commission clearly shows how important it is to discuss and to focus on these topics as well. Part of our work, because I work for Vice President Jourová, as you've mentioned, was to introduce a clear way how we will try to improve and secure some more democratic developments in Europe, also when it comes, for example, to the elections integrity. And this has been summarized in the European Democracy Action Plan, adopted and published also about a year ago. So I would like to invite everybody to read it. But part of the effort is also the ongoing conference on the future of Europe, because this is meant to give voice to everybody to contribute and to say how the future of Europe could look like or should look like. And again, the structure of the conference is a bit too sophisticated, but there is one panel which focuses on democracy and human rights. So whoever wants to raise voice and introduce some ideas on what needs to be done or how the European agenda needs to be shaped in this area can contribute through the online platform, which is multilingual. It is in all languages. So no matter if somebody speaks English or not, the space for the ideas is open, and this will be reflected further. And this is part also of this new push for the European democracy as such. And there are more, but again, I don't know how much time we have.
No, that was brilliant, Monika. Thank you so much. And let me use this power of community, and we are all together, everybody watching this now, everybody who contributed to Slido. Let me use this opportunity to ask again, because you're watching this, I'm assuming you are a human rights defender, or at least you hold the values, European values of equality and respect for fundamental rights highly, which means you should get included and have your voice heard. When it comes to the initiatives Monika just mentioned, it's crucially important that those who want to see those values upheld amplify their voices, make alliances, and make their voices heard through various initiatives which are now being worked on by the European Commission. So to conclude the session, I think it's really useful, again, to focus on some key points. And the key points really are the points that you as the audience focused on, and that's cooperation, and that's solidarity. And when you take cooperation and solidarity and unity together, what you do have is community. We heard that the Commission is financing CSOs through the Rights, Equality and Values program, but we also know that more needs to be done at the national level and European level to support human rights defenders in all countries across Europe, but especially in those countries where they are under threat. More needs to be done to support independent institutions, because they are the ones who are the guarantors of democracy and who uphold human rights and the rule of law in their member states. Independent institutions need to be strong and powerful, and that's why I'm, as chair of the European Network of Equality Bodies, after working for over a decade now, also together with the European Commission on standards for equality bodies, so happy that finally, potentially new legislation on standards for equality bodies is coming. And please do become a part of that conversation at the European level as well. Also, abusive litigation against journalists and human rights defenders, or the SLAP lawsuits, something that is also happening in many member states. A great new initiative worked on by the European Commission. I have to say many things are going on. In our member states, we know this as NHRIs and as equality bodies. You know this as human rights defenders from all sorts of places, trade unions, civil society organizations, religious communities. Also, those commissioners who are a part of the new push for democracy, people working in the Fundamental Rights Agency, also looking at fundamental rights issues at all times. We all form a community, and we need to build alliances amongst each other, because upholding the rule of law, upholding fundamental rights in Europe is no easy task. And building those bridges and supporting each other, sharing information, providing support to those under attack, if you will, but also working preventively so that we have standards for independent institutions, so that we have stable ways of financing civil society organizations, so that we have legislation, European legislation, which focuses on lawsuits, which have the goal of silencing free media and silencing human rights defenders. That's what we need to be doing, and that's what we need to be doing together. So once again, cooperation, unity, solidarity, togetherness, that's what builds communities. And that's why it's so good that FRA has enabled us a space to work in these heavy times, difficult times, COVID times, when unfortunately we could not be together physically for the Fundamental Rights Forum, where many of you are present online in your member states across Europe watching this. Think of community and collaborate, because that's what we need to be doing. Thank you.